today's Computer Side Chat, where we are going to be talking about how Congress makes a law. To this point, we've talked about how our legislative branch is structured, how Congress is divided up, and then also the roles within Congress and what those people do. Now, the main job of our legislative branch is to create laws, and now we need to look at what that process looks like, because it's a pretty long and complicated one. So we're going to look at the process of taking a bill and turning it into a law. Let's get started. So before we get rolling with that, let's make sure we understand some important terms. And I'm going to throw a lot of them at you. They'll probably make a little bit more sense as we go forward. So just to go through them real quick as you write them down, a law is a rule or set of rules intended to govern behavior. Something like laws against theft are there to govern your behavior with other people. It dissuades you from robbing other people. A bill is a draft of a proposed law, so it's an idea that has the opportunity to become a law. A resolution is a decision that carries the weight of law, but isn't necessarily a law itself. A rider is a provision added to a bill that has little to do with the bill's main topic. A markup are revisions or changes to a bill while it's being discussed in Congress. A standing committee is a permanent congressional committee that deals with a specific topic. For example, the House of Representatives Armed Services Committee is the House committee that deals solely with the armed forces, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is the Senate committee that deals specifically with relations with foreign countries. A subcommittee is a smaller committee within the standing committee with a more specific focus. So, for example, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, might have a subcommittee devoted especially to Iran and our relationship with Iran and how we're going to interact with them. The House Rules Committee is the House of Representatives Standing Committee that sets the rules for debating or amending a bill. Again, that'll probably make more sense here in a second. And a conference committee is a joint committee of the House and Senate whose job is to resolve differences between the two chambers over specific bills. So again, that was a lot of terms thrown at you. The next few slides will give some context to those definitions. But before we talk about these things, you need to understand the definitions to those. So jot those down, pause the video if you need to, and let's move forward. So, let's talk about bills and resolutions. If you remember back to this slide, a bill is a draft of a proposed law, and a resolution is a decision that carries the weight of law, but isn't exactly a law itself. There are two types of bills, public and private. A public bill is a measure applying to the nation as a whole. So public bills are laws that are going to affect everyone. And an example of this would be the 2011 Budget Control Act, which raises the debt ceiling. Debt ceiling is probably something we'll talk about later, but that has to do with the nation's budget, what we're paying for, how we're paying for it. And needless to say, when we're talking about paying for government programs, that affects everyone. The second type of bill is a private bill, and this is a measure applying to a specific person or place. So, for example, a 2012 bill helps a Nigerian student earn citizenship. So this might be focused on one person or place and only affect that person or place. Now, resolutions. Resolutions are more decisions than actual laws. So there's no concrete law in the book. There's not necessarily something to be broken there, like, say, laws against theft. A resolution is more a decision of something government is going to do. And there are three different types of resolutions. The first is a joint resolution, and this is a proposal dealing with special circumstances with the force of law. So, for example, when Congress declares a war, that's a joint resolution. Declaring war on another nation and saying that we're going to come after you, that's not necessarily a law. There's nothing to be broken there, but it's a decision about something that government is going to do. A concurrent resolution is a statement on an issue by the House and Senate jointly. No force of law and no president's signature is needed for a concurrent resolution. So, for example, both houses together recognize and honor the sacrifice of military families. So essentially, it's kind of an unofficial thing. It's a way of expressing an opinion or, having Congress openly declare something that really isn't a law. It doesn't really have much of an effect, but things like that. Recognizing the sacrifice of military families, or congratulating a team for winning a championship. Those are concurrent resolutions. They're not anything that's going to affect people inside or outside of the country, but they're still things that can be passed by Congress. And lastly is a simple resolution. And this is a proposal dealing with either house that does not require the president's signature. So, for example, the House passes a proposal to amend its own rules. So a simple resolution can only deal with one chamber. So it might be something that only affects the Senate, or it might be something that only affects the House. We'll talk about rules here in a second. Actually, we'll probably talk about those down the road in a later set of notes. But needless to say, the House has to pass rules when they debate a bill before it becomes a law or before it's even voted on. So an example of a simple resolution in the House would be voting on what rules they're going to follow before they debate a bill. All right, now that we have that aside, let's talk about the lengthy process of getting a bill or a resolution passed. So this probably looks super confusing, and I'm going to try to break it down. And once we do that, it's going to seem a lot simpler than this chart would make it seem. So if you look at this is a chart where on the left represents the process of a bill going through the House, on the right a bill going through the Senate. One thing that's important to remember is what's stated here underneath the picture of the Capitol. A bill must go through the full process in both chambers until both pass the exact same bill. So if we're looking to pass a law in Congress, it has to be the exact same in the House and the Senate before it can actually go to the president to be signed into law. And so as you're going to see, that's going to lead to a long, arduous process here. But anyways, let's start with the process over in the House. How does a bill or a resolution become official? Well, let's look at a bill. And we'll start up here at the top. First, a bill is introduced. So a bill is introduced in the House, and that can be a bill on anything. Since it's the House, this could be, say, a bill on a tax that the House wants to add. So let's go with that. So this tax bill is introduced into the House. From there, the bill will be sent to committee, and the bill is then referred to a standing committee. Now, if you remember, again, let's go back. A standing committee is a permanent congressional committee that deals with a specific topic. So the standing committee in the House that deals with taxes or fiscal issues would get this bill. Then that standing committee would assign that to a subcommittee that specifically deals with this type of bill. So it might deal with taxes or this specific type of tax. So number 2, assigned to subcommittee for study, hearings, revisions, and approval. So the subcommittee looks at it, marks it up, changes some things they like, that they don't like, keeps the things that they do like, and then after that, once they've finished making changes of it, they take it back to the standing committee, where then they can make their own markup. And again, if we go back once more, a markup is revisions or changes to a bill while it's being discussed in Congress. Now the full standing committee can make their markups to a bill and add things such as riders. So this is a tax bill. We could add something to this like adding spending to the military. That's not necessarily what this bill covers, but it's something we can add on to it and try to pass it without people really noticing. Get something done that isn't necessarily relevant to this bill. After that, the bill goes to the House Rules Committee, which sets the conditions for debate and amendments. And again, the House Rules Committee is the standing committee within the House who comes up with rules for debate. So once the bill is on the floor, which is this last part here, they follow rules set by the House Rules Committee. This can be things like how long the bill will be discussed, how much time the bill has to be presented, and if the opposing party wants to counter what is being written in the bill and propose an argument for why the bill should be rejected, they can be allotted time to propose that argument too. So the bill goes to the floor, the bill is debated, then passed or defeated. If passed, the bill goes to the Senate. So again, like I said earlier, the bill has to pass in the exact same format, both the House and the Senate. So just because that bill passed the House doesn't mean that the bill is going to the president and can now be signed into law. The Senate, the process is almost exactly the same. Bill is introduced, it's referred to the standing committee, which deals with the topic of the bill, which is then assigned to a subcommittee, who then again studies it, revises it, reports it back to the full standing committee, and then the full standing committee will talk about it and mark it up. But you'll notice in this Bills and Committee section, there's one part missing, and there's no Senate Rules Committee. That's because debate over a bill in the Senate is a lot more informal. So there are no set rules for debating a bill or talking about a bill in the Senate. So essentially, once the bill is finished in committee, it goes to the floor, it's debated, it's then passed or defeated, and if it's passed, the bill will go to the House. If it's already passed the House, then it goes to conference committee. So in this example, it passed the House first, now it's passed the Senate, and now it's going to go on to the conference committee. Now, if you remember, the conference committee is the joint committee of both the Senate and House. And now they're going to negotiate a compromise of this bill. So, like I said, while these bills are in committee or on the floor, they're being changed. They're being marked up. The bill that went through the House and passed then goes through the Senate, and then it's marked up and it's changed. So then the bill that was passed by the Senate is actually completely different from the one passed by the House. So now we have to come together as both chambers, talk about it, and find a bill that both the House and the Senate will agree on. So House members and Senate members meet in this conference committee, they negotiate the bill, and guess what? Once they've settled on a bill, it goes back through this whole process again, and it has to pass the House and the Senate. Let's say the compromise bill they came up with passes the House, but it doesn't pass the Senate. Well, now the conference committee needs to meet again, talk about it again, make more revisions, and send it back through the whole process. So what you might be seeing now is it is a really, really long process to actually get a bill passed. And it can go through this whole web multiple times before it actually passes. Now, let's say that bill gets through conference committee, it goes back through the House and the Senate. Both of them agree on all the changes that were made. They both passed the House and the Senate. Hooray, we have a bill passed, and now our tax bill will go on to the President of the United States. So the bill goes to the President's desk. The President will either sign the bill into law or veto it. If he vetoes it, the bill does not become law. However, then the veto can be overturned with a 2/3 vote in both chambers. So that is the very long, very complicated process of how a bill becomes a law. And I know that was really a crash course on it. I kind of flew through that. That's okay. We're going to talk about this more at length in class. And then we are also going to be doing a project which is going to delve into this more and give you more of an appreciation for how this process works. So from here, go ahead and go to Schoology and take the quiz. Make sure you have your notes filled out. This chart especially needs to be completed. Make sure you jot down any questions you have for me, and we will talk about this tomorrow in class. Have a great night. I will see you tomorrow.